Okay. So a little bit of background. When I got here, they had probably were about like halfway done maybe with result entry. And Kelly Shannon had been working on that. And then I was kind of under the impression that Lab was doing it all, but I realized like through the evolution of this process that Lab was doing half of it and Kelly was doing the other half of it. And that's pretty normal. The result entry piece is typically there's usually somebody on the ambulatory team that is at least aware of how it functions. Um, so I finished up the ones that we still had that lab had done their half, but we still had to do our half on. So nobody really at Great Falls has built any of the result entries. They're all built except for PPD, which Michael, Kim, and I just talked about. But this is just in case you guys need to make edits or changes, or if you have any that you need to build in the future. I want to make sure that, Don, you kind of have an understanding of how these get built. Okay.
You're so kind.
I know, and generous, aren't I? All right. So basically, there's two components to this. There's a lab component and there's an ambulatory component. Okay. So I'm going to start in the ambulatory component and kind of show you. I'm going to grab an example and then I'll jump into lab and show you what we pull from lab and what they do, just so you understand it. So in result entry, we're going to start with something kind of simple. So we're going to start with, let's do, where's my, does anybody see my strep test?
Rapid strep A
Where, yeah, where do you see that?
at the bottom.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so basically, when we build a result entry, we give it a mnemonic, okay? We give it a name and we can give it an abbreviation. Our type is always going to be lab. That's going to default in. Whether or not we want this to create a result task, so do we want this to go to workload? This is yes or no. And then whether we're marking this as actually confidential data. This is typically left blank, okay? Then we have two choices under group or test. We can basically say this is a group or this is a test. So if this is an individual one component that we are reporting off of, like a strep test, so we're saying it's positive or negative, then we're going to make it a test type, okay? If it is something that is bigger than that, so like our urine dip, which has multiple components that we report off of, the urine dip is a group type. And I'll show you a group type in a second, okay? So test type for our basic stuff. Is it numeric? If we say numeric yes, when I go to the results tab, it's going to ask me for my units, the number of decimal places, and then it's going to ask me for my my reference ranges. Okay, so you can go by age and sex, low, high, all of that. If I say that it is not numeric, my results are basically kind of like building a group response. So this is like my element code in the group response dictionary, and this is my element name in the group response dictionary. And these are the options that the user is going to get presented with. Okay. And then restrict results to this list basically says, can I free text something in? These are mostly set to no, I'm sorry, to yes, because we want to restrict them to what we're actually giving them for options. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. This piece here is actually this is what links this to what lab has to build. Okay, so this is a lookup into the OM order dictionary. Every result entry has to be tied to an OM order. In order for it to be tied to an OM order, it has to first be built in the lab test dictionary. So this is what lab does, and I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I just want to show you a couple of components because they become relevant to us. So in the lab test dictionary, oops, I wanted a cube, but it shouldn't matter. So our strep is right here, okay? So a couple things. So this LIS only field is very relevant. So if I look at this strep, if this is set to no, this basically means, so no and orderable basically means that I can order this in OM, right? And that makes sense because I would order a strep test in OM, okay? We're going to look at another one in a minute that will be a little bit different. So basically this needs to be set to LIS only no, and then on page 5, 4. I always have to click through the pages to find what I'm looking for. Should be on here. I don't know why. Usually the results information is here. 1, 3. Yeah, it's usually on page 5. I don't know why they don't have it on here. But this is usually where I personally get the information to populate my result entry on the ambulatory side. And I'll show you another one and it'll make more sense. So I'm going to go back into ambulatory. And we'll go back into result entry. Okay, so I'm going to look at like our urine dip. This one's a little more complex. So everything's basically the same, except for this is the kind of the rubber band that's going to hold everything together. And so because it's the rubber band that's going to hold everything together, first of all, this is what's orderable. So this would be in the lab dictionary as LAS only no, because we want it to be orderable. And it's a group test. So the elastic that's holding everything together is the group, okay? And on the results tab, when you put group here instead of test, on the results tab, this is where I list out all the individual components, okay? And each one of these components is built in result entry, but it's built as a test type. So this is my elastic that's holding everything together. If I go back into result entry, this is one of my components. This component gets set up as a test, just like we did our strep, okay? Basically what that's saying is we're not going to order this. We're just going to use it to result our urine dip, okay? So if I go to results here, this is where I have all of my result codes for this particular component of the urine dip, okay? This test, the OM order, when I look at this in the lab test dictionary, glucose urine, you can see this is set to LIS only L, and it's set to orderable no. Basically what this does is it sends it to the order dictionary so that I can attach it here, but it makes it so it's not orderable to the end user. So that particular one, glucose is a test type, and it's tied to this test, which is set up as not orderable, because you would never order the component of point of care glucose urine. You would always order the urine dip. The only reason we have this built in here is so that it can be a component of that bigger test. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So basically what would happen is lab would have to build the tests and all of the components, okay? And I point this out just because a lot of times, and this happened with us actually, they'll say, oh, we built them, but they'll have this as orderable no and LIS only as yes, because that's how they're used to setting up their components. So a lot of times you'll get over here and you won't be able to find it. And the reason you won't be able to find it is because this is not set to an L. So that's why I kind of point this out. So lab would have to build the test and all of the components. And then you, for an individual test, would just build the test. For anything that has components, you would build the individual components and then tie them all to the group. If you look at this particular one, where the heck are those results? Oh, they have them in test. That's why. I'm like, why? I forgot that lab.
Hey, Allison, you're a liar.
What? Hey, easy. Easy. So here, test lab, and the test dictionary, and I don't care. So if I look at this glucose urine on page 5, here's the results that they have. So I basically typically just copy what they have into ours. Every once in a while, it'll be different, like for a particular clinic or whatever, and you can always make adjustments. But that's usually like at the sites I've been at where lab hasn't been involved, I just go through and do that. Carol did like offer to send screenshots of this. I knew how to look it up, but if you needed to make changes in the future, just work with lab and they can help you with this part of it.
Okay.
Clear as mud?
Sure.
All right, so that's that. Now we are going to talk about registries Hee hee hee.
Yay!
This may not be as fun.
I know it's not going to be fun.
No, it's not bad. It's a little bit confusing, and quite honestly, I don't have a great way of teaching it. Like there's not a great order to do this in, so I'm gonna do the best I can, and we'll just kind of go from there. I did open a task, Don, just so you know. I talked about this with Michael and Kim as well. I don't know that our CMS settings are correct for our registry stuff. Like I just don't have a lot of confidence that everything's exactly
I
the way.
read the task.
Okay, all right. So once they send that back, you'll be able to know where you need to build this stuff. I'm gonna kind of just jump around right now because some of it's in standard, some of it's in the DMD, some of it's in test. It's sort of all over the place and just doesn't make logical sense to me. So just keep that in mind as I'm doing this. All right. So basically, most of our most of our registry dictionaries are off ambulatory dictionaries registries. Okay, this is kind of the chunk of dictionaries that we're going to review. Registries are the registry. Okay, so I'm going to actually jump into web too, because Kim, I know you maybe aren't super familiar with this. So let me show you what these are. And Don, as far as like uses for this, I think chronic care managers will probably be one area. The more I think about it, I think this might be helpful for research clinic because I think
Yeah.
it would be a pretty easy way for you to be able to, like you said, a lot of times they're looking for like a certain diagnosis. Like you could easily swap that diagnosis in and out as they need different ones.
Yeah.
So I think this might be helpful for them for that.
We'll at least get them started until.
Until they have some reports. So in ambulatory, guys, under more, there is these patient registries, and basically registries are just a way to identify a population of patients, okay? So basically these are patients under this depression registry that qualify for this registry. So they've met some kind of conditions that say they should appear on this list of patients, okay? And I'll show you kind of how those qualifying activities occur and all of that, okay? These patients are patients that fall into heart failure. So basically, these are patients that you might want to monitor for heart failure, or you might want to target, a wellness program for heart failure, or, high blood pressure, all of those things, okay? So they're just groupings or lists of patients. When you're in a particular registry, all these things are called items. Okay, and it's kind of like building a patient list format for anybody that's done that. And it's very similar to building surveillance for anybody that's done that. So basically, these are all items, okay? And this whole chunk is our item display, okay? So if we go back into our dictionaries, registries are this list, okay? So female wellness is a registry, hypertension is a registry. So those are registries. Okay. Registry displays are how we put all of these items together so that they display when we actually go into a registry. Registry items are the individual items that we put here. So some of these are hard-coded fields. Others are standard items that Meditech has created for us. And a standard item could be something as simple as a query. Okay, and then we also have the ability to create custom items if we wanted to create like our own query. Okay. Items. Registry types are kind of our groupings of our registries. So these are all considered adult wellness registries. These are all considered hypertension registries. Okay. These are depression registries. So the blue highlights are what our types are. Registry work lists, we have the ability to create two types of work lists. So there's something called automatic work lists and there's something called manual work lists. Okay, so those are here at the bottom. So automated work lists are basically work lists that using rules drive what patients populate those work lists. And all they are is think of registries as the top level. So I may say, okay, this is what qualifies you for my depression registry. But then within my depression registry, I want to further refine that to say, I only want to see patients on that registry that have a PHQ-9 score greater than 14. So I can create an automated work list, which is basically just a subset of that registry. And using that rule, it will basically create that subset for me. Okay? Manual work lists mean I'm basically adding and removing patients myself. So instead of a rule saying this patient qualifies for this registry, I'm basically saying I'm putting this patient on this manual work list. So I've found something in their chart and I want to add them to this particular work list. Okay. Those two things are built in the registry work list dictionary. Okay. Registry work groups are where you give people access to registries. So you have to be part of a work group in order to have access to any of the registries. Okay. Registry removal reasons is if I'm removing a patient from a registry, what are my reasons that I can remove a patient? Okay.
Standard content for that?
I think there's like 2. There's a ton of standard content for everything else, but I think the reasons basically only have 2. I could be wrong. We'll look. I'm going to go into each one of these dictionaries. I just want to kind of high level them first. Facts and rules are how we create the conditions that basically determine what patients are going to fall on to our registries and to our automated work list. So each registry and each automated work list can basically have an addition rule and a deletion rule. And when they meet the conditions of the addition rule, they'll fall onto the registry or the automated work list. And when they meet the conditions of the removal rule, they'll fall off of the automated work list or the registry. Okay. In order to build rules, we first have to create facts. So facts are the individual components of the rules, and then we put them into our rules, and then we tie our rules to our registries and our work lists, and that's what governs them coming on and off the list. Does that all make some sense at a high level?
I plead the fifth.
What do you mean? Come on. What's your question?
I understand it.
So then don't be a brat.
I'm just shaking my head.
Oh, okay, fair enough. This registry data item validation and rules engine validation. So registries are super annoying in that in order for us to like put them in play and actually start seeing patients populate them, Meditech has to like run some routine that they have to run. So you basically have to open a task and ask Meditech to run this routine, which is super annoying. So in order to test them, we have this rules engine validation and we have this fact validation. And that basically tells you that your fact is working and that your rule is working. So you can test those out before you have to reach out to Meditech and say, hey, can you put these in the registry? So usually we run any facts that we build through the fact validation, any rules that we build through the rule validation. Once we know they're working, then we say, hey, Meditech, can you run that loop? Okay? Or that routine. Questions so far? All right. So we're going to actually look at the PHQ-9 one because that one is set up all the way through the work list portion. So we'll take a look at that one, and then I'll talk a little bit about kind of what it means to you, Don, in terms of what you need to do. So one of the things to keep in mind with registries is all of the standard content that we have been delivered is locked down. We can't make changes to it. So any changes that we want to make, like if we want to swap out a query or something, we have to rebuild those, okay? There's copy features in a lot of this. I don't know if everything has it. I can't remember, but we can look as we go. So that's just something to keep in mind as we're validating these and looking at these, that if we want to change something, we actually have to rebuild them. So it can be time consuming, but there is a ton of standard content in there, okay? So I'm going to start kind of easy. So the work group is pretty straightforward. So basically, we have one work group in here currently, and it's the standard content work group. And pretty much what you're putting in here is, do you want these to be expanded or collapsed when you come in? So do you want these little drawers to be open or closed? Okay. The users that have access, okay, and then what they actually have access to. So this is under the diabetes registration type. These are the registries that they have access to, and these are the actions that they can take on that registry. So here's actions. These are the actions that they can actually take, okay? Oops. Automatic work list, basically same exact thing. So this is just a listing of what automated work lists we have access to. So you can see under event driven, I have pre-visit. Under depression, I have my PHQ-9 score. So that is down here. It's saying these are the automated work lists that I should have access to. Okay. Manual work lists, same thing. This is basically just saying these are the manual work lists that I should have access to. I don't know why that's kind of weird the way that's set up. I can't get into edit on these, so that's why I'm using view. And then can I delete a work list? And then what manual work list actions do I actually have access to? Okay. So anybody that logs in that gets a message that basically says you don't have access to this, that's because they're not in a work group. Okay. Now your work groups are really going to depend on what users are using this and what registries you're actually going to want to use. So at some point you're going to want to create an access group that takes away any standard content that you haven't validated, because if it's not working or we don't know if it's working, we don't want to give people access to it. Research clinic. Go ahead.
Is there any reason why we wouldn't have all the staff and the user with access?
I don't. You could. I don't think there's any harm in that. I don't know that all the staff is necessarily going to use this.
Yeah, but if they don't have it, then somebody's going to say, "Why don't I have that?"
Well, I mean that's fine.
Floating around the clinic, I can see this being used in almost every area if they use it correctly.
Sure. Then yeah, I don't think there's any harm in that. I think like your research clinic, I don't know if they would want to refine like to just see their stuff. You could certainly have a group for them. But I think if everybody's going to use it, and you're right, I mean, you guys do float a lot. I don't think it would be harmful to give them access to everything. I would initially take away anything that hasn't been validated. Okay. So that's work groups. The reasons, yep, 2, and there was no standard content. It looked like somebody actually built these, probably Meditech at some point. Okay. So this is the most straightforward dictionary ever. It's basically a mnemonic, an active, and a name. Okay. All right, so now we get into the fun stuff. And this is the stuff that doesn't have like a real great order, so you're just going to have to kind of go with me on this. All right, so registries. So registries are kind of like the top level, right? So if we look at our depression registry, okay, we basically are giving it a mnemonic, an active, and a name. We're giving it a type, okay? So that's where is it going to fall, what grouping is it going to fall under, okay? We're giving it a display. So I mentioned that display dictionary. This is where we're saying these are the columns and these are the items that we actually want to display, okay? Is this confidential? So again, this goes back to if you have access to confidential data, which basically everybody does. Is it available for the engine? We need to set this to yes. This is basically what allows it to work, okay? Qualifying rule is the rule that puts patients onto the registry. And removal rule is the rule that takes patients off of the registry. If you don't put a removal rule, then you would manually take patients off of the registry. Okay. This is if a patient expires, how many days, it's very backwards, but it's basically how many days after a patient passes away do we take them off the registry. Okay. There's some questionnaire integration. I don't know I don't know a lot about it. I'll put it on our agenda for Carmel to talk about tomorrow.
Okay.
And that's what those next two are. Okay. And then you can attach a common letter. So you do have the ability to send letters to everybody or to certain people on a registry. They get built just like our regular letters get built. I think there's a registry type for them. And you can associate common letters, which just kind of puts them at the fore. It's kind of like a favorite letter. So if there's something that you commonly would send to depression, you could list that out here. Okay. One of the other things with this, what was I going to tell you? Hold on. Oh, these 3 prompts, they actually also live in the EMR toolbox parameters, I think. So you can set them like one way and then just override them here.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the registry. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You're basically just tying a bunch of things together. Okay. We're going to look at the display and the rule here in a second. Okay. The registry work list is very, very similar. So if I pull up my PHQ, oops. So remember, an automated work list is simply a subset of a bigger registry. Okay. So basically what I'm saying is this again is depression type. So it's going to fall under my depression under automated work lists. I'm going to use my work list display of depression. Okay. Same fields here available for engine. This is the registry that I'm linking it to. So basically it's going to say, I qualify for the PHQ-9 greater than 14 registry if I, 1, meet the conditions of this rule, and I, 2, met the conditions to be on the depression registry. So it pretty much goes out to the depression registry. Let's say you have 40 patients on the depression registry. It goes out to the depression registry, searches through those 40 patients, finds the one that meet this criteria, and then puts them on your automated work list. Okay? And when I get to the rules, this will make more sense. And we can go back and revisit all of these. It's just, like I said, there's just not a great order. Okay? So that is the registries and the registry work lists. Okay? Registry types are super straightforward. They're just groupings. Okay? So again, these are all the groupings that are just those blue headers. And it's mnemonic, active, and name. These are very simple and straightforward. Keep in mind, Don, with all this stuff, because this is like true standard content with the dot before that we can't edit, in order to see it, you actually have to go into view. Okay. So if you're in edit and you do a lookup, you're going to be like, hey, there's nothing in here.
Okay.
Go to view. I make that mistake frequently. All right, so those are the types. All right, so let's look at the display. Okay. Let's spell depression correctly. And let's go into view. Okay. So basically what you're doing here is you're tying in the items that you want to display on the registry. So I'm going to go into my depression registry. Okay. These are basically what is listed here. Okay. And this is a lookup. If when you create a new one, this is just a lookup into the item dictionary, which we're going to look at next. And you pretty much pull in the items that you want. Display as a column means that when I come into this registry, it's going to display. Okay? If I say display as column no, when I go into my hide show button, it will be listed here as an option to add to the registry, but it will not be automatically checked off. Okay? So basically, you're going to start out with what you want to automatically display every single time, but then you can give them additional options if they want to add something to it. Okay? So that's this column. If you set it to yes, when you first come in, it's going to default. If you set it to no, it will be available under hide show, but it won't show automatically. Okay? They can save their own default. So like they could come in and say, I want to do this. I want to add CBC and VPA level. If they say apply, it will just apply it to this particular session. If they say save and apply, it will apply it going forward. So
now,
they don't have to.
Can they take away?
Yep. So they can come back in and uncheck them, or they can always come back in and say restore to defaults.
Okay.
Okay. The next prompt is filtering, I believe. Yep. So show and filter, yes or no. So the other option is we have these rules that put patients on and off the registries, whether they qualify. Then we have these automated work lists which can further refine that. But if a user wants to, they can actually go into this filter themselves, and they can filter the heck out of this. I'm not even going to try to explain this screen because it's very overwhelming to me and I get very frustrated by it. But basically, you can filter by lots of things, okay? And these data items are the ones that you have in your display dictionary, and they're set to show and filter yes. That is
Okay.
what puts them on the screen. Okay. You can do the same thing where you can just filter, which is like apply, or you can save filter, which will apply it moving forward.
Okay.
Okay. You can get crazy in there for sure. Okay. So
Can't
that's,
imagine anyone really going to use that besides
no,
me.
I think it gets way too complicated, to be honest with you. Registry item basically just means, is this built in the item dictionary? So is it a custom item? So this PHQ-9 assessment is in the item dictionary, and we'll look at an example of that. However, this current meds, it's like a field. So it's a hard-coded thing that basically is just going to list the current meds. Okay.
Okay.
This is view only. It's going to be based on whether it's in the item dictionary or not. You can't change this or edit anything with
Are
this.
those current meds for the condition, or are they just current meds
No,
on
these
their
are all current meds.
own? Okay.
Okay. Unless we built some kind of rule that used current meds to say don't come onto my registry, but the current med field itself is going to show all medications.
That's ugly.
Fair enough.
That's horrible.
So let's use that as an example. Let's say that you wanted to take that off. Okay. So if I went in and I created depress, and I copied from depression, I could actually come in here and say, hey, I don't want that on here, and I could take it off.
Okay.
And then I would save this, and then I would take this display, and I would have to go attach it now to my new registry and my new work list.
Okay.
Okay, make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so that's the display dictionary. Okay. So now we'll jump over to the item dictionary. So there's lots of standard content in here that's already been delivered. Okay. These are kind of the different types of items that you can have. Okay. So we'll look at our PHQ 9. Let's look at the score. Okay. So basically what this is saying is mnemonic active name, same stuff. It has to be in a status of final. Okay. And your item type is actually going to drive what happens down here. Okay. So I'm going to actually create a new one so you can see. I'm not going to copy. So this has to be in final. This type, if you notice, like if I pick query, this is the information I'm going to get. I can attach an HM item to it, I can attach a query group to it, or I can attach an individual query to it. Okay?
Can you attach all three?
Yep, you sure can.
Okay.
Okay. If I say I want this to be a medication, then I can list out, again, an HM item. I can list out RX norm codes, which get tied to the drugs, or I can list out drug concepts. So what you were saying about, oh, all the medications are ugly, if you wanted to list certain medications on a particular registry, you could create your own custom medication type and just list out the drugs that you want to display on that registry.
Okay.
Got it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You can list a questionnaire, and you would just list out the questionnaires. You can list a special indicator and just list out the special indicators. So all of this, and I don't know every single solitary field in here, honestly. You can, use help to ask Matitech when you get into like the details of it. But depending on what you want to create as an item, what type is going to drive what you have to tie to it. It's kind of like creating like formatted data type of thing. Okay. If you want reports, you can list out the EMR ID that's associated to the report, or you can list out the medical record document that's associated to the report, or you can list out both. Okay. So typically what you're going to do initially is if you want to add a field to a particular registry, you're going to come in and you're going to look under view and you're going to say, hey, does that already exist? Okay. If it does, you want to go in and you want to look at it. So let's use our PHQ-9 as an example. So if I come in here to my PHQ-9 assessment, okay, this is the HM item, and these are all the queries
so of course we built our own.
Yep, so there's where there's where the problem lies. Okay. So,
So we have to build the PHQ-9 one all.
correct. Now, what you would do, and that's why I say what you want to do is kind of from a strategy perspective is pick pick one registry, right? Like say I'm going to start with this one registry. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to validate that each item that is in that display is actually using what you're using.
Okay.
Okay, so you would say, okay, I'm going to go with depression. So you would go into your depression registry, that dictionary, and you would say, what display, sorry, I'm all over here. You would go into the registry and you would say, okay, for depression, God, every time. For depression, what's my display? Oh, my display is depression. Okay, so then you would go to your display dictionary and you would say, okay, again, I did it again. Okay, and you would say, okay, what data items are in this display? And then you would go check any of these data items that you do want to display. You would go check and make sure that they're pulling in the data that you are using.
So how come I don't have a little link?
I don't know. I don't know.
There's no link there.
Ask Meditech that question. I don't know.
Do you know what that link is?
What?
The link?
I know, it's awesome. I love it, but it doesn't exist here. So this is why, like, the concept of, oh, we have this standard content for all these registries, let's go live with them is great, but you can't because you have to validate them and it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So you would go in, you would validate each item is what you want. You would take off any items you don't want. If you go in and you're either building a new registry or you're validating a registry and you want to know if you can display something, you would come in here and look through all of the different items. Like I said, there's a lot of items already. So like here's a medication one that's aspirin. So this is all of the RX norm codes that are related to aspirin.
Which those should be the same that we have.
Yep, absolutely. Anything with your meds are pretty standard. The only thing would be like if one was missing but the meds are pretty standard because we can't edit those anyway. So like if you were looking for one for aspirin, hey, there's already one in here. So always look before you build.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So those are the items. All right. So we've got our registries, our work lists, our displays, our items. So let's look at our rules and our facts. All right. So first we will look at our registry. So let's look at our depression. God bless. Here, oh, I'm recording, so I'm not going to say what you are. Okay, so our qualifying rule is depression. So if we go into our rule dictionary, and this is a different rule dictionary than the rule dictionary that we build all of our other rules in. So keep that in mind. Okay. So if I go to, so our category is always going to be health manager. Anytime you see category when you're dealing with registries, you're basically probably going to have two choices. It's going to be health manager or it's going to be surveillance. Always pick health manager. Okay.
For the category?
Yep. And when you go into your rule, basically you're building what you want the conditions to be. So basically what I'm saying is if the patient's problem is active and the problem is depression, or the SNOMED code, which is kind of an internal code, is depression, then put this patient on my registry. Okay? Don't worry too much about this syntax quite yet. Okay? But here you're building the conditions. And basically to build the conditions, you basically have a handful of choices here, and they're going to vary based on what the choice above them was. Okay? So like if I insert something here, you notice how I got different options?
Yeah, this is the same thing as building the rules.
It's very, very, very similar. Just the populating of the information is a little bit different. So you know in building rules how you have variables and fields?
Yeah.
That's what facts are.
Okay.
Okay, so your facts are basically the pieces of the puzzle. Your operator is basically your and, or, then, all of that stuff. Okay. Your rule, you could actually embed a rule within a rule, so that gets a little bit more complex. Okay. Your groupings basically group things together. So like if you're in the regular rule dictionary and you're doing like an if statement and you're saying if this, and this, those would all be group one. And then if you're going to do a second one, then you would make those group two. So it kind of just groups all of the little components together. Okay. The good news is most of these rules, honestly, you're going to be copying from other rules and then just tweaking and adjusting. You shouldn't have to do a ton from scratch, but the logic of it is almost identical to how you build the other rules. It's just instead of variables and fields, you're basically using facts. Okay? So that takes us to facts. So rule engine facts, okay? And basically, so if we take a look at one of the facts, okay, so if we look at this was one of the facts in the PHQ-9, okay? So basically what this fact is saying is that if this item, PHQ-9 score, is not in this range of -1 to 15, then I want it to add to my registry, okay? If we look at problem, if we look at hypertension ICD problem, we're basically saying if the problem is in this list of problems, then I would qualify for this particular registry, whatever registry this rule happens or this fact happens to be on. Okay? This tells you what rules the fact is in. So the reason that's important is if you come in and decide, hey, you know what, we actually don't want right eye and left eye in here, and you remove these, it would impact both of these rules. So you would then want to go to those rules, and I think it shows you right in here, but let me look. I can't remember. It may or may not. It'll go in and it will tell you, yes, it won't tell you in here. I think you have to run a report to see what registries it's actually on so that you know, hey, when I change this, these are the registries it's going to impact. Okay. The rules engine validation, basically what you can do is you can come in here, pick a category. So what's our category going to be? Dawn. Good job. And then we would pick our rules. So we would say, I want to run my PHQ. Actually, let me run my depression rule. Okay. And then whatever patient you had gone and documented that on. So like, let's use AmTest Dawn. Perfect. It's weird. Oh, I'm in standards. Hold on. Oh, Lord have mercy. I'm just going to try that one. We'll get the gist. And you compile that. It's basically going to show you the rule. So this is the rule, okay? And it's basically going to show you, should show you, that's weird. It usually has a little, oh, here it is, up top. So this basically says that when I evaluate that, Dawn is in fact going to meet the requirements for this rule to populate on this registry. Okay? So if this said did not meet, then that means if you know I've documented the appropriate things on this patient to have them fall in this registry. So let's say I've given this patient hypertension as a problem, okay? And I come in here and it says not met, that means something's wrong with my rule. Okay. So then I have to go back to my rule and look at that. There's the same thing for facts. So there's the fact validation, registry, oh, sorry, data item validation. So if I come in here and pull in that patient again, and I want to do PHQ, these two. This is basically going to show me what was the value and what is the value. So if I went in and changed this, the old value, I would expect it to be different than the new value. So this is how you test that those items are displaying what you want to see and that those rules are working correctly. So this would tell me that, yes, this patient is going to fall on there, the rule's working correctly, and for their PHQ-9 assessment and their score, they're going to have a value of yes, and they're going to have a score of 8. I need to make sure that that is, in fact, what I documented.
Okay.
So this is basically how you test what's displaying here without asking Meditech to run that routine every single time. Once you've validated that your rule's working, and basically what you do is you edit your rule, you edit your items, you go document on a patient that you know should meet that criteria. You run them through the validation. If it meets that validation, then you know your stuff is working. If it doesn't, then you know you have to go back and tweak it. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So the other thing just for you to know with this is that registries are built very similar to surveillance. They build facts and rules the same way we do. They build qualifying rules the same way we do. They basically just rubber band them together a little bit differently. So the quality team, like especially Julie Armstrong, has been super involved in the surveillance build. So if you have questions, she might actually be a good resource for you, just so you know. They do the same validation stuff that we do. It's all really similar. Theirs is just running basically on the acute side, and ours is basically running on the ambulatory side. Okay, so just keep that kind of in mind. Where I would start with this is I would start with a couple of things that I would go through sort of what's in there for standard content registries. I would pick one, okay, and I would start validating that one. I would go in, I would look at the display, and then from the display, I would go check. I would first decide what on the display do I want to keep. I would clean that up, and then based on what you're keeping, go validate each one of those items and make sure that they are pulling the data that we have in the system. And then I would go check the qualifying rule and make sure that that is in fact what we want our criteria to be. And then if there's a removal rule or if we want to add a removal rule, I would make sure that that criteria is what we want it to be. Okay. And then I would populate all of that onto my new registry. And then I would have Meditech run their little fancy loop. And then you would have your new and improved depression registry or chronic care registry or cancer registry or whatever it is that you want. Once you've validated one or two of them and you get like a feel for it, then I would go in and say, okay, I'm going to build a cancer registry for such and such and try to build one from scratch. Most likely you'll be able to start with something else and then just tweak it and modify it.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I know it's a ton of information, but does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. We'll ask Carmel tomorrow about the questionnaires. And then I did record this, so you'll have it. And then if you guys have other questions, you and Michael can work with Carmel on that stuff.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we only have 6 minutes, so I'm actually going to stop. We'll do the wellness schedule tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thanking myself. I'm kind of sick of talking, to be honest with you. All right. I know you find that hard to believe.